Did she brave mental illness and addiction? But her tragic love stories reveal her devastating vulnerabilities. Born October 21 in 1956, Carrie Fisher joined a family of Hollywood royalty. Her parents were none other than Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher. As a result of their fame and notoriety, young Carrie found herself thrust into the public eye. But this wasn't the childhood that she wished for. More than anything, Carrie wanted a semblance of normalcy. Carrie hated sharing her mother with the rest of the world and was always vying for her attention, wishing to be like everyone else. She dove into the world of literature, burying herself in stories which earned her the nickname, the Bookworm. She was a writer at heart, but it wasn't long before her mother's influence led her straight to center stage. Carrie Fisher was only 16 when she started alongside her mother in the Broadway show Irene. But this was as far away from normal as she could get, and soon the demands of the stage conflicted with her schooling, and she was forced to drop out. Only a year later, she filmed her very first film called Champion. Slowly but surely, her educational pursuits fell by the wayside, and there was no turning back. Today, it's impossible to think of Carrie Fisher without remembering her most iconic role, Princess Leia in Star Wars. At just 19 years old, she could never have predicted the success of the space opera. Princess Leia, with her fiery retorts and undeniable bravery, was nothing short of iconic. But behind the glamour of her newfound success, Fisher hid a terrible secret, one she kept for most of her life. In 2016, Fisher dropped a scandalous motherlode with her tell-all memoir The Princess Diarist, which drew on the diary that she had kept while filming Star Wars. In these pages, she confirmed what some people had only suspected, that her on-screen chemistry with Harrison Ford had deeper roots in reality. Fisher and Ford were conducting an illicit affair. If you're thinking Carrie Fisher and Harrison's affair rivaled the romance of Princess Leia and Han Solo, think again. In truth, their romance was far darker, shedding a rather unfavorable light on Ford. It turns out that their tryst began at George Lucas's birthday party, where she was the only girl in a room full of lusty men, which was a recipe for disaster. At the party, the crew applied Fisher with drinks. Despite hating the effects of alcohol, her youth and insecurity drove her to fit in, and soon she was completely under the influence. That's when the party took a scary turn. The crew started taking advantage of her, and some even tried to drag her away from the party. When Harrison Ford witnessed these injustices, he took action. In a seemingly heroic gesture, Harrison Ford intervened, saying, "Pardon me, but the lady doesn't seem to be very aware of what she wants." After this, quarrels arose, and under the cover of commotion, Ford whisked Fisher away from the event himself, leading her to the private confines of a car. Now that he had her all alone, his desire spoke for itself. In that same car, Ford took the drunken Fisher in his arms and kissed her deeply. This month, the beginning of their 3-month affair. But just like the uncomfortable backstory of their first makeout session, their romance was far from a fairy tale. In her book, Carrie Fisher doesn't paint Harrison Ford as the most attentive lover. In fact, her descriptions of him betray her own desperation for his affection. Beyond sleeping with her, Ford rarely bestowed her any warmth or even talked to her. He was a married man with 2 children, and there was just no way that he would ever be serious about her. Carrie, on the other hand, had tunnel vision because she only wanted him. The retelling of her teenage angst and obsession with Harrison Ford is extremely vulnerable and mostly sad. She confesses that she often fantasized about him leaving his wife, and wondered what more she could do to make him care for her. And while she tried to maintain her sense of humor through it all, it becomes clear that their dalliance was mostly one-sided. She wrote, "I loved him, and he allowed it." Despite the pain of her unreciprocated feelings, Fisher could never deny their on-screen characters benefited from their off-screen chemistry. It made their romantic scenes more comfortable, and she often used comedy to coax laughter out of him. But looking back on these bittersweet moments, Fisher often wondered if she had picked the wrong leading man. It wasn't just Harrison Ford who shared a spark of attraction with the leading lady, but also Mark Hamill, who played the role of Luke Skywalker. Later on, he fully admitted that he and Fisher had something special between them, but his professionalism held him back from pursuing it any further. They did, however, share quite an intimate moment. While discussing kissing techniques, both Hamill and Fisher took it one step further. He remembered the moment quite vividly, saying, "When I think I'm a fairly good kisser, I'd like to let the women come to me rather than being aggressive." And at this point, Carrie says, "What do you mean?" And the next thing they know, they're making out like teenagers. Although this incredibly cute exchange ended in awkward laughter, it left an indelible impression on Fisher. When she wrote about her affair with Ford, she also noted the missed opportunity with her other co-star. Her sentiments read like a knife to the heart. She wrote, "I'm sorry it's not Mark. It could have been, it should have been. It might have meant something, maybe not much, but certainly more." Hamill, on the other hand, had a very different way of dealing with those lingering what-ifs. Fisher and Ford's scandalous affair shocked him. He admitted that if he had known back then, his jealousy would have gotten the better of him. But not all was lost. Going forward, their time together on Star Wars fostered a lifelong friendship. For Hamill, a relationship with Fisher just wasn't in the cards. She would have always been a bit too much for him. He said, "She was too creative. She was too smart. She was just the best." When George Lucas approached Fisher with the outfit that she would be wearing for the opening scenes of Return of the Jedi, she thought he was joking. This was the slave layer outfit, a metal bikini that left very little to the imagination. After the film's release, it effectively transformed Fisher into an icon. Everyone adored this sensual look, except maybe Fisher herself. That's right, the idea of wearing this revealing bikini set Fisher on edge. She wanted to look her best, and throughout filming, she had to sit as straight as possible to prevent any lines or creases from showing. By being held such a high standard of perfection, this image greatly affected her self-esteem in the years to come. But she did find one consolation. She absolutely relished the scene where she got to end Jabba the Hutt's life, saying, "I just couldn't wait to kill him." In the film, he's the reason that she has to wear this dreaded bikini in the first place. And his brutal end felt like the perfect redemption for both her and her character. But the golden bikini wasn't the only Star Wars look she took issue with. It turns out Carrie Fisher also hated Princess Leia's signature double bun look. It took about 2 hours to perfect, so she had to show up to set earlier than everyone else. To top it all off, she thought it was completely unflattering, making her face look wide and unattractive. She felt enormous pressure to look the part of a princess. In fact, during casting, she almost missed out on the role entirely. In 1976, George Lucas was on the hunt for a beautiful girl to play Princess Leia. When presented with the idea of Carrie Fisher, he almost passed her up. The girl he truly had in mind was actually Jodie Foster. But because of scheduling conflicts, she had to turn down the role. Today, it's difficult to imagine that anyone else could have done the stubborn princess as much justice as Carrie Fisher. During that very same year, she embarked on her brief fling with Ford. Fisher met another man. His name was Paul Simon. She didn't know it at the time, but this famous musician was about to shake up her love life for the next 12 years. That following year, Fisher performed on Saturday Night Live, and she crossed paths with Simon once again. After that, they couldn't get enough of each other. It was long before Carrie shacked up with Simon in an apartment on New York Central Park West. Her wild energy invigorated her new boyfriend, but things between them weren't always easy. Unfortunately, she grappled with other demons, like her mental illness and her frequent use of illicit substances. Soon enough, her erratic behavior infiltrated the bliss of their romance. Because Simon faced an onslaught of Fisher's intense mood swings, the two of them were constantly on and off. During one of their first breaks, Carrie forged a special bond with her Blues Brother co-star, Dan Aykroyd. Dan worried about Carrie's declining weight and frequently tried to get her to eat more food. Only during one of their shared meals, everything went wrong. While chewing on a Brussels sprout, she started choking. At first, Dan thought that she was laughing, but then to his horror, he realized her distress. Coming to her rescue, he performed a risky maneuver that ended up saving her life. 10 minutes later, and both of them were still in shock, which is when Dan turned to Carrie and asked her a startling question. Having seen her through a near-death experience, he decided to propose to her on the spot. Truly taken away by this act of heroism, Carrie actually agreed. To be honest, they almost made it down the aisle. They bought the rings, and they got their blood tests, but in the end, she just couldn't go through with it. Her love for Paul Simon still remained, and she ended up running back to him. Even though the couple reunited and tried to make things work, their relationship was still turbulent. Throughout the 80s, they did date, but they soon found themselves on the brink of breaking up once again. The prospect of saying goodbye was too heart-wrenching for both parties, so instead, they decided to do the complete opposite. They got engaged. The wedding ceremony took place at Simon's New York City apartment, and the guest list boasted such famous names like Kevin Kline and Billy Joel, but it wasn't long before the fighting started. Even on their honeymoon, Fisher remembered exchanging harsh words with her new husband, saying, "Not only do I not like you, I don't like you personally." But this was only the beginning. Carrie Fisher could make Paul Simon laugh no problem, and it was her sense of humor, her light, that had them reconciling time and time again. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to maintain their marriage, and after only 11 months, they decided to call it quits. But, of course, this wasn't truly the end. Like two fickle magnets, these lovers kept coming back to each other. Even post-divorce, Fisher and Simon kept their flame alive. She even helped raise Simon's son from another marriage, Harper. When they did fight, she tried to recognize the hilarity of it all and reminded herself how good they were together. Still, this just wasn't enough. During a trip to Brazil, Fisher visited a spiritual healer. This encounter changed everything. While Paul Simon was away writing music in Brazil, Fisher decided to visit this healer, and she participated in a spiritual cleansing ceremony where she drank hallucinogenic tea. The visions she experienced were like no other, and she must have found some clarity because this episode ultimately drove her to end her relationship with Simon for good. After all, she described their relationship as feeling pinned beneath Paul's ever-spinning, ever-controlling brain. Although Simon used his romance with Fisher for songwriting inspiration, he didn't share her tell-all approach when it came to their relationship. Though opting for privacy, he acknowledged her freedom to write whatever she wanted. In his famous song, Grace Land, he refers to her in the lyrics saying, "She's come back to tell me she's gone, as if I didn't know that, as if I didn't know my own bed, as if I'd never noticed the way she brushed her hair from her forehead." While the breakup weighed heavily on her conscience, Fisher was starting to develop serious problems of her own. Her use of substances began during the filming of The Empire Strikes Back, and it only got worse from there. But through it all, she managed to find a silver lining in the depths of her struggle and used her road to rehabilitation as inspiration for her novel, Postcards from the Edge. She opened up a dialogue about mental illness and addiction, and her positive message gave hope to others who were also grappling with similar trials. In spite of her personal struggles, Fisher still managed to navigate a successful career, especially when it came to writing. On top of acting and her own creative pursuits, Fisher became a prolific script doctor in Hollywood, polishing up other writers' screenplays. George Lucas even hired her to look over the dialogue in his Star Wars prequel screenplays. Little did she know, her time working on Star Wars was far from over. After her drawn-out relationship came to her close, Fisher began dating the well-known talent agent Brian Lord in the early 90s. Although she often referred to him as her second husband, the couple never got married. They did, however, welcome a baby girl named Billy. Everything seemed to be going so well, that is, until Lord revealed a shocking secret. In a move that devastated Fisher, Lord left her for another man. The whole situation made her feel humiliated and betrayed. She hadn't been able to make it work, and saw herself reflected in her own parents' messy breakup. Her father, Eddie Fisher, had left her mother, Debbie Reynolds, for Elizabeth Taylor. All of a sudden, she stood in her mother's shoes, left alone with a baby girl to raise. Thankfully, it turned out her love life was not completely destroyed. In 2003, Carrie Fisher met a young ex-soldier named James Blunt, brought together by mutual friends. This unlikely pair met at a restaurant and became fast friends. When he told her that he had recently landed a record deal and was on his way to L.A., she asked him where he was staying. After he acknowledged that he hadn't quite found a place yet, she made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Fisher invited him to live with her while he recorded his debut album. He fondly remembers recording his hit, "Goodbye, My Lover," in her bathroom, as well as his interludes with Debbie Reynolds, who refused to see him unless she was fully made up. But despite these joyous moments, there's one haunting memory that he can't seem to forget. A joker. As always, Fisher took a cardboard cutout of Princess Leia and positioned it outside James's bathroom. In response, he recalled an unsettling detail. On the cutout's forehead, she scrolled the date of her birth, and, most importantly, the date of her passing. Although he can't remember the exact date, he confesses that it was eerily close to the date of her actual death. With the announcement of a new Star Wars trilogy in 2014, fans could hardly contain their excitement. The most delightful part? The inclusion of the original cast. Carrie Fisher would reprise her role as Princess Leia. But while Fisher was happy to return to the Star Wars universe, there was one stipulation that did not enthuse her. Carrie felt unbelievably pressured to lose weight before filming The Force Awakens. Now, with the wisdom of her years, she called it how she saw it, saying, "I'm in a business where the only thing that matters is weight and appearance." That is so messed up. They might as well say, "Get younger," because that's how easy it is. So, by this point, she was more than comfortable speaking out about the pressures of Hollywood. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worst on December 3, 2016, when Carrie Fisher was on her way back to L.A. when she experienced a medical emergency aboard her commercial flight. Only minutes away from landing, a nearby passenger noticed that she wasn't breathing. While waiting for paramedics to arrive, a knowledgeable passenger took the reins and performed CPR for as long as possible. Even as medics whisked her off to a hospital, things just weren't looking good. Placed on a ventilator, Fisher lay in the ICU fighting for her life. Sadly, 4 days later, she passed away at the age of 60. Todd Fisher, Carrie's brother, took the loss of his sister especially hard. And then one day, while looking through his mother's desk drawers, he made a shocking discovery. He found a ripped page with his sister's unmistakable handwriting all over it. When he read what she'd written, he couldn't believe his eyes. The piece of paper read as follows: "I am dead. How are you? I'll see you soon. I would call and tell you what this is like, but there is no reception up here." Then it says, "Cut. You scene. You set up. You heavenly location. I have finally got the part that I have been rehearsing for all my life. God gave me the part. This is the end of the road I have been touring on all my life." For Todd Fisher, this was an unprecedented coincidence. He couldn't help but feel like there was a reason for him finding this note at just the right time. It felt like she had reached out to him from the beyond. So, what do you think about the hidden note? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next video.